please give Shahid a really warm North Texas welcome. And I am just going to submit this right away. I hope the brother will spit out some lines for you tonight. All right.
Thank you for the warm introduction and your very warm welcome. I was at A&M Law School this afternoon with Lon and was very excited to see him there and very excited to see all of you here this evening. I figured what we talk about is NSA spying because it's in the news, CIA torture because it's in the news, and I want to connect it to action opportunities that you here in the DFW area can pursue. And just to front load that piece, I am much less interested in what we lawyers can do than I am in what you guys can do. The deference to lawyers and legal expertise is 9/10 of why we find ourselves in this predicament as a country.
Yeah.
We cannot defer to elite activists. And I think you all in the room, the Pax Christi people, the folks from the Dallas Peace Center, the folks who were working on the Bill of Rights Defense Committee campaigns back earlier in the 2000s, all of you, the various organizations you represent, the Martin Luther King Library, was it? Yes. All of you are the building blocks from which our civil society is constructed, and it's in your hands, quite frankly, the future, not mine, and not any acronyms, certainly. So why don't we just get started? I'd love to engage you in the conversation, so I'll ask a few questions just to get a sense of where you guys are at and what you might have heard to this point. But just first, has anybody heard about the president's proposal on NSA spying that's supposed to be in the news tomorrow?
Oh, yeah.
Does anybody want to just say what it is? I'm happy to fill in any gaps.
NSA has the data, now they say to the telephone company, you keep it. That's what we need.
That's right.
Maybe.
Does that strike anyone as... Oh, Paul, do you want to say it just a little louder?
Well, NSA had all the data, and now they're gonna ask the telephone companies to keep it instead, and NSA will ask for it as they need it. Perhaps with court supervision, perhaps not.
Depends on which proposal proceeds. So I'm going to lay out 4 different reform tracks that are currently moving in Washington, just so you understand what's at play, and then we'll dig into them and figure out what's good about them and what's problematic and what might remain to be desired. So the president's proposal, which will come out tomorrow, let me actually start. I'm going to start with the worst, and I'll work my way to the best, right? So the worst proposal on the table is coming out of the Senate and the House Intelligence Committees. The Senate version is Senator Dianne Feinstein's FISA Improvements Act. The House Intelligence Committee version is called the End Bulk Collection Act. I'll just note that both of those 2 names are red herrings. You might recall another piece of legislation like the Patriot Act, which aims to invoke themes that are very antithetical to the substance of the bill. The End Bulk Collection Act and the FISA Improvements Act are very much in that vein. Both of them would purport to address warrantless bulk surveillance by the National Security Agency. Neither of them would in fact do that. The most recent bill, the Intelligence Committee out of the House, would particularly allow the NSA essentially to query phone companies' records with an administrative subpoena, which is to say without a judicial review or warrant or check or balance. Unilateral executive action. It's not very different than what the NSA has been doing for the last 10 years, which is to say housing its own database, retaining that data indefinitely, having no meaningful controls or oversight over the use of that data, and among the things we know have happened as a result are at least dozens of NSA officials using the government's very powerful spying tools to stalk their former lovers and ex-girlfriends. That's the kind of national security that the NSA has been guarding. So just to note, if the next time you hear somebody claim that these programs are necessary for national security, 2 things you might say in response are, A, the president's convened 2 different review panels, both of which have identified not a single instance in which these tools were ever actually helpful from a counterterrorism standpoint, and 2, the one thing we do know that the NSA's powers have been useful for is to stalk women who've left, whether it be abusers or what have you. So that's some of the ways in which the NSA's program has been used, and we talked about the Intelligence Committee's bills. We're going to now pivot to the president's proposal, and then I'll get to 2 pending congressional reforms, the USA Freedom Act and the Surveillance State Repeal Act, in just a second. So what you're going to hear about tomorrow is an announcement out of the White House with a proposal that I would describe as long overdue, insufficient, meaningful, but vastly under-inclusive. Okay, and just to set the stage here, July 2008, president is campaigning for the White House. Does anybody remember the largest self-organized affinity group on mybarackobama.com? It's a fascinating story in light of the recent history. Starts with a get and ends in right. There's an acronym in the middle. Get FISA right. FISA is the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act. It's the statute passed by Congress after the Watergate and COINTELPRO eras to put the FBI and the CIA back in the bottle, right? It was the act that Congress passed to try to keep domestic surveillance from abusing constitutional civil liberties. It was the act which Congress amended in 2008 to give the NSA a blank check to continue mass surveillance, legalizing what is plainly unconstitutional. It is one of two acts, the other being the Patriot Act, that figure very centrally into the NSA's domestic dragnet. So, Get FISA Right in 2008 is the largest group on mybarackobama.com, and the president, to his credit, issues a written letter responding to the group, explaining what he will do as president to curtail, rather, I should reframe that, promising to, without specifying what he would do as a president to curtail NSA spying. So that was 6 years ago. And after 6 years, and a year of sustained transpartisan controversy, the president is finally going to reveal what he meant when he wrote the letter. And the long story short is not much. So he will do partly, as Paul described, what the Ruppersberger-Rogers bill will do, which is to say, force the NSA to no longer hold on to the data it collects and allow the telecom companies to retain telephony metadata. I want to pause here and just separate two things. You guys have heard about the Snowden revelations. There's been a story about every 3 days. The first Snowden leak, which was not quite a year ago, it was about Section 215 of the Patriot Act being used by the FISA court to authorize the surveillance of about 100 million Verizon business customers. That was the revelation that gave the Bill of Rights Defense Committee the opportunity to sue the National Security Agency, represented by the Electronic Frontier Foundation in our suit, First Unitarian Church versus NSA. The president's proposal will address that program. It will address none of the dozens of other programs revealed by the Snowden revelations after the first one. And I want to note that because everything you will hear about in the next week, there will be a vibrant debate about how much credit should the president get. And I just want you to know that the answer should be not much, because what we're dealing with here is the tip of an iceberg that is much more vast. And we're going to get into this in just a minute. But just so you know what's going to happen tomorrow. He will announce a proposal that the NSA cease to retain telephony metadata, that the telecom companies do it instead. One positive aspect of the story, there were early indications that the reform would enable the NSA, the telecom companies, to retain that data for up to 5 years, longer than the 18 months that they are currently required to do so. That actually ultimately is off the table, according to what we've heard at least about the president's forthcoming announcement. It will be that the phone companies retain data for 18 months, unlike the Ruppersberger-Rogers House Intelligence Committee bill. The president's proposal will require judicial review for the NSA to gain access to telephony metadata. So it's marginally better than the worst possible alternative on the table at the moment. And I do mean to say marginally, specifically because what the president's proposal does not do is A, anything about internet surveillance through any of the dozens of programs that Snowden has revealed. B, it does not require the NSA to demonstrate any showing of relevance of the telephony metadata it might seek to an actual terror investigation. And C, it won't do anything to reform the opaque process that currently governs the FISA court. Has everybody heard about the FISA so-called court, the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Court? It's not really a court. Yes, sister?
I wanted to bring in something relevant to this issue. John Brennan I was in the meeting where we met with President Harris and to ask him not to send any more of the police to be trained at School of Americas. He promised he would not. I was right there, I heard him say it. But when that was over, they went to the States and they took them around, and John Brennan talked to them and talked him out of his promise. And he said, okay, we'll keep sending them, but don't tell them that I said I would.
I'll get to the CIA in just a minute.
I just want to say that John Brennan had his name all the way back.
No, you're totally right. And the CIA is independently problematic, and we'll get to Brennan in just a second. Maybe the last thing I'll just say on the NSA issue before we pivot to CIA torture and spying and the elements of corruption that connects those two seemingly different spheres is a quick recap of the congressional bills. So while the president's proposal is 10 years late, at least dozens of billions of dollars short and meager, inadequate, but still meaningful at the margins, there are two bills pending in Congress that would do a great deal to constrain mass surveillance. The first is the USA Freedom Act. Unlike the Patriot Act, it is fairly named. It is at least describe accurately what it aims toward. It was written, ironically, by the authors of the Patriot Act. And you might find this a little bit cute, and that's probably not unfair, but the authors of the Patriot Act claim in the wake of the Snowden disclosures that they didn't know any of this was going to happen. They didn't mean for mass surveillance to happen. They wanted a targeted surveillance authority that the FBI and the NSA could use when they had suspicion that someone was going to do something wrong. So what they've said is we're going to write a bill, and they have, the USA Freedom Act, that would vastly curtail mass surveillance. It would end bulk collection to a far greater degree than either of the intelligence committees or the president's proposal. It would reform the FISA court process so that a public advocate would appear before the court so that it hears more than just the government's side. It would allow the telecom companies, as they have requested, to reveal to the public information in the aggregate about the data requests they're getting from the government. And particularly, it would require that when the NSA goes to a judge to get access to metadata, the NSA has to first demonstrate the relevance of that data to a terror investigation. Does that sound particularly controversial to anyone in the room in a nation that claims to lead the free world? Right? To whatever extent these programs have demonstrated any utility at all, the showing of relevance required under the USA Freedom Act would not actually undermine any legitimate national security objectives. And that's the point I want to leave with you. Civil liberties and national security are not opposed values. We can achieve security by guarding our constitutional rights. That is exactly how the founders meant for us to ensure our security going forward when they created our country 200 years ago. And it's to your credit that you remember this, right? Most people in our country don't. I mean, it's true. The wool has been pulled over our culture's eyes, and you can blame that on propaganda, blame that on the military-industrial complex, blame that on the industrial interests that undergird mass surveillance, blame it on cultural apathy and Miley Cyrus. You know, take your pick. But the fact of the matter is, you here understand and remember that, which makes you very important in the going forward resolution of these issues. And I'm going to get back to in just about 10 minutes what that might entail. The last piece I want to say on NSA surveillance before I move to the CIA is the Surveillance State Repeal Act, and I note it for a particular, well, let me say two more things. The USA Freedom Act, which we just discussed. Notably, it has broad bipartisan support in both chambers of Congress. Republicans support the bill, Democrats support the bill. A bill like that, with that broad bipartisan support across all corners of the country, there is no reason it should not be the reform proposal to pass. The president's attempts to create a red herring, weaker reform, the intelligence committee's attempts to create a red herring, weaker reform, those should not distract you from where the action is at, which is the Judiciary Committee's bill, the USA Freedom Act. I'm not quite certain, to be perfectly frank with you, where your respective members of Congress are with respect to that bill. It would be a very interesting one to raise to them for their attention and consideration. And however much it might seem implausible that your representatives would back it, James Sensenbrenner, the author of the Patriot Act, who represents a conservative Republican district in Wisconsin, has been no friend to progressives. But he's championing the USA Freedom Act, and he's been willing to take on the president along with Democrats who generally have been much more complicit in mass surveillance over the last 5 years than have been Republicans. It's a disturbing inversion of the partisan calculus for progressives to witness. But at the moment, the loudest voices in Washington for constitutional liberties are not Democrats. In fact, last summer, in August 2013, the NSA's bulk collection was almost ended by a House-led, Tea Party-led revolt on the House Defense Appropriations Bill that Nancy Pelosi stopped. The only reason mass surveillance continues in America today is because Democrats representing safe blue seats in Chicago and the Bay Area betrayed their prior positions, their constituents, their oaths of office, in order to carry the Bush administration's water because President Obama is now holding the glass. That's a fair description of what's happened in Washington. So, last piece on the NSA. In the face of these various reform proposals, none of which would do anything to curtail internet surveillance, That's the much bigger issue here than telephony metadata, because internet surveillance is content and metadata. It is much more vast, and it is far more revealing about your activities than who you call for how long and when. None of those reform processes would touch internet surveillance. The one that would is the Surveillance State Repeal Act. It's pending in the House. It was authored by Representative Rush Holt, who chaired the House Intelligence Committee before Nancy Pelosi stripped him of his committee assignment because he was too aggressive in his oversight responsibilities under the Bush administration. He is easily the smartest member of Congress. He is a bona fide rocket scientist. He taught physics at Princeton before going into Congress. And he's retiring at the end of this year because he's basically fed up trying to fight the national security state and getting no help from his colleagues. So when you call your representative and you ask about the USA Freedom Act, you might also ask about the Surveillance State Repeal Act, which again is the only pending proposal in Congress which would stop the internet dragnet. Yeah? So a standard that would repeal the Patriot Act entirely, would repeal the 2008 FISA amendments entirely. It would force the intelligence agencies, as they should be, to justify their post-9/11 powers from a pre-9/11 baseline. That's the NSA stuff for the moment, yeah? Questions before we move into the CIA?
As you said that they have not been able to attribute any success towards the terrorism and so on and so forth. So why do you think NSA is taking on all this heat and continuing to, what is the end game?
I will cite a former US president who was the Supreme Allied Commander in World War II, President Dwight Eisenhower in 1961, in his last address to the country before leaving the White House, warned of the emergence of a threat to American democracy from within the military industrial complex. He coined the term to describe the confluence of Pentagon, military contractors, and policymakers. And the short answer is it is a corrupt racket. There is a ton of money in mass surveillance, and it all goes to corporations, and it's funneled by the very same members of Congress who could not care much about your rights or their oaths of office. These are the very same people who get campaign contributions from the employees of those companies. Dutch Ruppersberger, the chair of the, isn't the chair? He's on the House Intelligence Committee. He might not be the chair, but he represents—
Ranking member.
Thank you. The ranking member of the House Intelligence Committee. He represents the district that includes Fort Meade, Maryland. One of the bills, the bulk collection, the End Bulk Collection Act, he authored it. His constituents are all of the NSA officials and contractors who are making money off this, which is to say you can be quite confident that his bill is not going to end bulk collection. I wish I had a more satisfying answer for you. I mean, at the end of the day, what I'm reflecting upon for you is that our established channels of access, whether elections, courts, none of it matters anymore. All of them have degraded. You cannot vote these changes into place. We tried that with the president in 2008, right? He was supposed to reverse the Bush legacy. You've seen how well that's worked for us.
No.
We cannot trust the courts. Our courts were created to check and balance executive power. They don't do that anymore. 3 weeks before the Snowden revelations forced the world and the country to grapple with these issues, the Supreme Court kicked out a case alleging mass Fourth Amendment violations by the NSA because at the time no one could prove that they were being monitored. Executive secrecy kills courts. Courts cannot review what they don't see. And courts have unfortunately grown largely complicit in their own co-optation. The creation and expansion of the state secrets doctrine, if anyone's interested in law, we could geek out about this afterward. The long story short is that courts don't do their jobs anymore, as long as it's checking the executive branch. There might still be hopes of justice, like in Lon's case or other cases where you've got private individuals against each other. But if the defendant in a case is the United States of America, if only because prosecutors stack the federal bench, you can be sure we're not going to get much out of that process. Questions from the thought?
He was the first one.
Sir?
To get a semblance, this is, far away, Washington, NSA, not so much. The West is going through a drought. In Utah, that big NSA data facility uses a tremendous amount of water.
2 million gallons a day.
Yeah, but that, what you just said, has been classified because the NSA says that reveals sources and methods. If you know how much water they use, knowledgeable technical people can calculate the size of their information infrastructure and server structure. That's a source and a method. So this secrecy is creeping outward. Meanwhile, other people living in Utah who need water ain't getting it because it's going to the NSA.
Indeed.
So it is a local issue too.
And before I turn to you off, just a quick note. I came here from Utah. I was there yesterday, and I was meeting last week with the Libertarian Environmental Alliance. Get that, right? I mean, that's not common. Connecting specifically around the Bluffdale Spy Center, we have bills in over a dozen states, including Utah and Maryland, to basically shut off the electricity and the water going to power the NSA servers.
Yeah.
Right? You should clap for that. And the point of that is you don't have to wait for Washington. If there's any theme you would take from my remarks, it is this. The Constitution is yours to defend. It does not belong to the courts, does not belong to Congress, it certainly does not belong to the executive branch, nor does it belong to Washington. It adheres in your actions. It's how we got the Bill of Rights in the first place, was through grassroots action by people who cared. And the moment is calling for we the people to assert ourselves again. I'll get into how you can do that in just a minute.
Yeah. When FISA court was instituted, there was always a judicial review. I understand that there is some judicial review, but I would really like to know that who appoints those judges and whether, because they are the final kind of authorizing institution.
Yeah.
So can we do something about that?
At the moment, the FISA court, it's the Foreign Intelligence Surveillance Act court, is staffed entirely by the Chief Justice of the United States. John Roberts, the Chief Justice of the Supreme Court, was confirmed weeks after the nation first learned that the NSA was tapping the phone system. It almost derailed his nomination. After having gotten confirmation, he now picks the judges to review these applications. They are extraordinarily deferential. They are almost to a T. I can think of at least one exception, but I don't think there are many more. Judges appointed by Republican presidents. The one Democratic appointee I can think of, whose name I actually can't recall at the moment, but is herself quite deferential to government power and executive agencies. The two things I'd say about the FISA court, in case you're talking to someone about it, is first, it only hears from one side, and the second is its decisions aren't public. It can't even cite itself, which is to say it's not particularly judicial. And I asked this question at A&M Law School this morning, and no one could come up with any actual rationale for why it's called a court. Like, there are people judges who sit on it, but they don't perform a judicial function. So it's not really a court at all. And when the president says that these programs have been submitted to rigorous oversight by all three branches of government, you can laugh, because in fact none of the branches of government have delivered any oversight to these programs. Possibly the executive, but that's a whole other ball of wax we could unwind after for those who are inclined. So let's, sir?
Who was the person from the Bay Area that you were referring to?
Nancy Pelosi is the minority leader in the House, and she was, when the House Defense Appropriations bill came up for amendments last August, there was a Tea Party influenced Republican, not freshman actually, I guess a sophomore, his second term, Justin Amash from Michigan. He led an amendment that would have defunded all bulk collection operations by the NSA. It failed the House by 7 votes in a body of 435 people. It was remarkably close. And it was a bipartisan vote. More Democrats actually voted for it than Republicans, but it's striking that many Democrats who raise a lot of money talking about civil rights were on the Bush administration side of the table, because so is the Obama administration. So they took the Bush-Obama line, as opposed to the same line that many of these very same individuals, like Nancy Pelosi, did under the Bush administration. That's maybe just a piece worth noting here, is the way that the partisan interest undermines the emergence of sincere grassroots populism, right? Because under the Bush administration, it was very easy to mobilize Democrats and progressives. Go figure, you put somebody else in the White House and suddenly they all shut up, and now it's easier to mobilize the other side. And the reason we're in this mess is because across our polyglot society, we don't actually work together. In anti-colonial struggles in the 60s, it was, I'm not going to say it was easy, that's actually certainly not true. It was easier, because people had common bases of political identification. They could relate to one another, right? There was demographic commonality, maybe you had ideological commonality. In the United States, we have none of that. The question before us is, in a polyglot society with lots of different perspectives, can we the people actually unite to raise a nonviolent voice to defend our own interest? And you will ultimately decide that question, as will your neighbors in other places. I do want to get into the CIA issues, though, connect them, and then drill down into local action opportunities. So just with your permission, can I move into that? All right, so what we know about torture committed by the CIA under the Bush administration is that, according to all the professional interrogators, it doesn't actually work as an interrogation method. We also know that it's responsible, torture that is responsible for the deaths of US service members, both because, in some cases, intelligence was bad, and, more importantly, torture was the #1 talking point for militant extremists when recruiting new recruits to join their ranks, right? Another way of putting that is that by declaring ourselves a rogue state, we invited people to flock to the struggle against us. That's the long story short on CIA torture. Thank you. There's a lot we don't know about CIA torture, like, for instance, how bad it was. People remember the Abu Ghraib photos? There are thousands more from the CIA black sites which have never been seen. In addition to the vast body of video evidence that the CIA destroyed in order to cover its criminal trail, is a further body of evidence that the Pentagon currently retains. It was ordered released to the public by 2 different federal judges in the summer of 2009 before, in the fall of 2009, Congress united despite vast partisan acrimony. You might remember what was happening in 2009. This was the Affordable Care Act. There was not a lot of partisan crossover that fall. But Congress agreed on one thing. In October 2009, in a nearly unanimous vote, Congress authorized changes to the Freedom of Information Act, the FOIA bill, also passed in the 70s to ensure government transparency after the Watergate era. And the amendments passed in 2009 did one thing. They overruled the courts that had required the disclosure of torture evidence, and they gave the Pentagon the authority to hide evidence of its criminal trail. That's where we have stood since. So because none of the evidence has been public, Senator Feinstein, despite being largely complicit in NSA abuses, ordered a long-running investigation of the CIA's human rights abuses. That investigation consumed $40 billion, 5 years. It's generated a 6,000-page report about CIA torture that remains classified, like the other information that our colleague here is talking about. No one's seen the report. It's 6,000 pages long. It's been finished for a year and a half. Why don't we know what's in the report? Because the CIA is a criminal agency and it's trying to hide its trail. So when John Brennan, there was a sister in the corner who was talking about speaking with, thank you. So John Brennan, who was confirmed as the head of the CIA last spring, said to the Senate Intelligence Committee when he was up for confirmation that he would examine the report and work on releasing it to the public. Fast forward a year, what we learned from Senator Feinstein on the Senate floor 2 Tuesdays ago is not only has Brennan failed to declassify the report, and not only is he fighting the committee on the factual accuracy of its findings, but after the committee found an internal CIA document that confirmed all of the disputed facts, that in fact torture was as bad as the 6,000-page report says it is, the CIA started hacking the committee's computers to steal the documents. And she went to the public to reveal this. This was the CIA spying on Congress to hide torture crimes. That's happening now, and in fact tomorrow, not only is the president slated to, it's actually a very momentous day, I just realized, not only is the president supposed to reveal his proposal on NSA spying, but the Senate Intelligence Committee will vote on whether or not to release the report to the public. And the latest we've heard here is that the votes will break down on a party line and the Democrats favoring transparency will narrowly win. I want to go back to the partisan interest. Why do you think Democrats might be willing to challenge the CIA and not the NSA? There is a good answer here, and we talked about it, or at least one of the lenses that might explain it about 5 minutes ago, or maybe 10. There's a problem with motivating progressives when there's a Democrat in office. The CIA's crimes are exclusively a Bush administration problem, or so progressives think. Whereas the NSA's crimes are a Bush and Obama problem. Here's the problem with that analysis. The Obama administration is complicit in torture in at least 2 different dimensions. The first is that force feeding at Guantanamo Bay is a human rights abuse. It continues even though torture as an interrogation instrument has stopped. Second, our country ratified an international treaty called the Convention Against Torture, which is the supreme law of the land under the Constitution. We also enacted a domestic enacting statute. It requires, as a matter of law, the investigation, the criminal investigation of all credible allegations of torture. There's a good reason for that. We fought a world war to establish that principle, right? That there are no good excuses. If you do it, it's a crime, period. It doesn't matter who gave who what orders. It doesn't matter if you thought there was an emergency. If you torture people, you are a criminal, period. That was the legal principle that emerged from World War II. That is the legal principle that not President Bush, that President Obama has been violating every day he's been in office for the last 6 years. It's bad to torture people. It is worse to say it's all right. I'm going to say that again. It is bad to torture people. That's what the Bush administration did. The Obama administration's crime is worse because it's the Obama administration that said it's okay. Right? We're going to stop torturing people, but we're going to leave the door open. No one's going to have any consequences. We're going to look forward, not back. We're going to wait for the next clown to come into office and do it again. That's what the Obama administration's legacy is, for better or obviously much worse. Okay, so threads connecting these two sordid sagas. First is secrecy, right? Why were the Snowden revelations so revelatory? Because nobody knew what was happening for 10 years. It was all classified. The former chair of the Senate Intelligence Committee, Jay Rockefeller, on the day that the New York Times revealed mass spying to the public in 2005, what did he do? He showed up with a note he'd written himself and stuck in his desk drawer saying, I learned something today, but I couldn't have lawyers with me, and I couldn't have technologists with me. I don't know if this is a problem, so instead of screaming bloody murder as I'm supposed to, I'm going to write myself a note, stick it in my drawer so I can cover my behind when this finally comes out in public. That's congressional oversight for you, okay? Same thing with the CIA. Why will the Senate's report be such a bombshell when it lands? Because nobody realizes how badly and how widely we were torturing people. Tens of thousands of detainees, beyond the 700 max capacity at Guantanamo Bay. Offenses as severe as outright rape of detainees, according to the reports of these photos, which no one has seen. Right, outright murder. And this is, the government that claims to be the land of the free and the home of the brave. So secrecy is one problem. As a result of the secrecy is unaccountability. That's another connecting thread. The Director of National Intelligence can show up to Congress and lie outright about the scope of spying and get away with it. Has he been prosecuted despite perjuring himself to Congress? No. Is he even out of a job? No. Can any of us get away with stuff like that? Right? No, of course not. I mean, these are executive agencies and officials being placed above the law. How else can you describe a situation in which executive acts are secret, the officials lie about it when they're finally caught, and those lies serve their own interests and their own job security? Can anybody come up with words that would describe that? A single word that might describe that phenomenon?
Corrupt.
That's a good one.
Ego trips.
I heard two more I didn't hear before. Tyranny and ego trip. Another one I heard this afternoon at A&M was treason. And,
Treason?
Treason. That's a particularly loaded term to go about, and I'm not going to chase the rabbit too much, but the point is, these at the very least represent executive agencies getting off their leash. It represents lawlessness. It is the antithesis of everything our country claims to stand for, and it certainly sullies the values and principles that have long made our country great and inspired the rest of the world. So, having said all that, I want to come to Dallas, Fort Worth, where we are standing right now. Anybody remember the North Central Texas Fusion Center report in the spring of 2008? Lon, do you want to tell us about it?
Oh, I barely remember it.
That's fair.
Bob, that fast.
And he does too.
Well, I don't know.
You want to add anything, please?
No, I don't. No, we finally got in to see it, I think in 2010.
Oh, yeah, we found it.
So the fusion centers, for anybody who's not familiar, there are 80 of them. Actually, the last count I had confirmed was 77. I suspect there are 80 now. They're partly DHS funded. When the Washington Post investigated the fusion center's funding streams, they found that they could only establish $31 billion in funding, which is to say there were unquantified further state funding streams that they couldn't unravel. So we're talking about at least dozens of billions of dollars thrown not at the NSA, not at the CIA, at local police departments to spy on you and your neighbors. The North Central Texas Fusion Center in 2008 released a threat analysis report classifying the lobbying activities of the nation's largest Muslim civil rights charity as a terror threat, as well as the organizing efforts of the largest anti-war network, all of which were nonviolent, both of which are constitutionally protected under the Petition Clause and the Speech Clause. The fusion centers were characterizing First Amendment protected activity as potential terrorism. You're paying for that with your tax dollars, and it's not the NSA doing it, it's your local police. There's a subsequent history with that particular fusion center. It's much less bad now than it was then. How bad is it? That's another question we could get into, but the point of this that I want to leave you with is that local police are complicit and actively engaged in the national surveillance state. And they don't answer to Congress. They answer to you. There's nothing we can do in Washington to stop the fusion centers. quite frankly, there's nothing in Washington we can do to stop the NSA. The only things that will stop any of those actors are grassroots movements. You in Dallas are uniquely situated to deal with the problems in your backyard, namely the fusion centers, and by building movements in solidarity with similarly situated groups around the country, you together can take down the NSA and the CIA. That's how we did it in the 70s, right? That's how the FBI and the CIA were forced to stop J. Edgar Hoover's corrupt reign of intimidation and domestic terror, because a grassroots movement forced Congress to investigate. It was not okay. It was not okay then. It is worse now. And it should not be okay now. And again, it's up to us to make this happen. The reason I bring up the fusion centers in particular is that on April 10th, just a little over 2 weeks, there is a day of action around the country targeting fusion centers in Los Angeles, in Boston, in the Bay Area, and Charlotte, North Carolina. I believe Cleveland is also taking action, and quite frankly, we would love to work with you and your allies here in Dallas to make sure that Dallas is on the map. That's a discrete action opportunity, and I want to just peg that, April 10th, fusion centers. But beyond that, I want to go a little more abstract here, so follow me. The most important, powerful things you can do, as I think the Pax Christi folks did this evening, is to show up somewhere new and introduce yourself and ask questions about what are the people encountering and engaging who you're meeting with. And then make introductions with other people who have similar concerns who they might not know. Lateral networking with a purpose, that is the meat and potatoes, no offense to vegetarians, of grassroots movement building, right? That's how you do it. Connecting communities of interest. Can anybody think of a particular group of any kind that you think might be interested in these issues but is not represented in the room this evening? Sister?
Our North Dallas Democratic Women's Club.
The Tea Party.
Yes, the
Tea Party, good.
Activists for Truth.
Nice.
They're a local group.
Uh-huh. Others?
Is there a Veterans for Truth representative here?
That's good.
Oh,
Oh, Veterans for Peace.
Veterans for Peace.
There's several of us here.
Good.
Good, and I'm glad to know that you guys are here, but what you're observing is there are groups that are not. Any group you observe not here, go talk to them tomorrow. You don't need anyone's permission. You don't need a board vote. You just have to pick up the phone. I can't do it because I don't live here. I'm, for all intents and purposes, useless in Dallas, right? Like, I can give you information from Washington, but nothing I say carries any weight here, like, except among those of you who are deluded enough to listen. But the fact of the matter is you are hyper-empowered where you live. And you are the only ones who can shift the equation where you live, and the only way to do it is to connect with your neighbors who share your concerns. Any excuse to engage them is an opportune one. Days of Action on April 10th could be that. A documentary screening at the nearest faith congregation could be that. A roundtable discussion could be that. At the Bill of Rights Defense Committee, our organizing model goes like this. Find someone in a city who cares about something, brainstorm who else should be at the table, and then come up with anything, any excuse at all to get them sitting around a table and to meet one another. I'm very excited to see so diverse a room here represented, organizationally, generationally, demographically. To that point, I would encourage those of you who see any unfamiliar faces in the room tonight, before you leave, introduce yourselves. It is vastly important, way more important than listening to me yet, right? Or casting a vote or anything else.
Everybody make sure to sign up on the sheets that are going around so that we have your contact information. We can let you know if an event transpires on April 10th.
And I'll be sure to share this with you guys too.
Are we at a stopping point, Shahid? You want to wrap it up?
I was going to kick a rhyme.
Some Q&A.
Yeah, I was going to kick a rhyme, but I can save it for later if you want.
You want to do a Q&A real quick?
Yeah.
Okay.
So you guys have heard my spiel. Would love to hear your questions.
Can you give that a round of applause? Thank you. You go.
A little off the topic, but the FISA extension that was done on the NDAA seemed to have suspension of habeas corpus.
The
as
NDA,
part
not
of it.
FISA.
Yes.
Yeah.
Is that
Repeat the
a
question.
misperception?
No, I think you're absolutely right. Paul was
Isn't
asking.
that outrageous?
Absolutely, and you'll hear me scream bloody murder about it. Many other civil liberties organizations.
Tell us the
do.
question, Shahid.
Yeah. The NDAA, Paul is referring to the National Defense Authorization Act. It's passed every year by Congress to give the Pentagon the authority to spend money that is separately passed in the appropriations bill. The reason it's problematic is that in December 31st, 2011, the 2012 version of the law for the first time included provisions that you might describe as Guantanamo for the rest of us. There are provisions that could be cited to authorize the military detention of U.S. citizens without trial indefinitely. It is terrifying. Separate, but
That was included in there.
Execution?
Well, they have the authorization to execute American citizens. And on the president's order.
I would separate the two issues because they're coming from different places. But let's just stay on detention first, because the execution authority is not actually in the NDA, but the detention pieces. How do I approach this? So we've been running a campaign to challenge indefinite detention within the United States. Over 24 cities around the country, like Dallas did with respect to the Patriot Act, have raised their voices. In fact, the very first jurisdiction to do it was El Paso County, Colorado. It's the site of the Air Force Academy and 5 military installations, and they passed a resolution before it even became law saying this is an abomination. It is contrary to the values that generations of service people have died to defend. Right? And when you have the Air Force Academy telling you that executive power is run amok and your rights are in danger, it behooves us all to listen. Right? And so yes, is the short answer. At the risk of, I mean, maybe this will be controversial, I'll put it this way. You will hear some issues from some voices and they will be conspicuously absent from others. This is one reason why popular constitutionalism matters. You cannot defer to any organization to be the exclusive source of your information, right? Even groups that you would expect to be concerned about military detention have had to be silent about it because if they ever have to fight it in court, they don't want to have admitted in public that it could allow this. We don't have that problem because I don't work in courts. I work with you and city councils. But the civil liberties organizations that work in courts, they can't touch it with a 10-foot pole because if they scream bloody murder, saying that Congress enabled the Pentagon to jail any of you indefinitely, when they show up in court and then say, no, this law doesn't allow that, the government, the judges are going to say, well, that's not what you said 6 months ago. So the litigation groups are constrained from saying in public what is actually happening. Does that make sense? I'm trying not to name names here to protect the innocent, but the point is that even mainline civil liberties organizations can't address everything. So you really have to be informed consumers, right, of your information. And just one plug there, we publish a blog. It gets about 10,000 hits a month. It's at bordc.org/blog. It's there for your reference. It's there as a tool to share information that you might not hear about others. Other than Paul, questions from? I'm going to go first to the back and I'll come back to you, Raj.
Here locally in Dallas, we are fighting a very difficult hard battle, which I don't think should be hard, to attempt to get fluoride out of the water. We don't wish to be medicated against our consent, and we've been appearing before the Dallas City Council. If you have any tips, clues on how to approach that, I'd love to hear.
I have about 5,000 files on fluoride. We'll blow it open from every PhD on the planet against fluoride. Remember your email address? I'll send you stuff that'll blow your mind.
Great.
There you have it. Good. Connect.
Very
That's
nice.
the answer. Question in the corner, and I'll come back to you, Raj.
And she said they've gotten them to vote against any illegal alien coming in, and Catherine didn't notice it. They voted against that, and now they're voting as a constitutional matter. Since it doesn't have an army, it shouldn't be being trained by the army in the state. We're going to vote on that. So,
That's absolutely important. Yeah.
I didn't hear the
Can I summarize it? If I got it right, Sister was talking about depleted uranium in the country. Was Ecuador, you said? That was Costa Rica is going to cease complicity in U.S. military training of human rights abuses, including the use of depleted uranium, which is a weapons-grade material that exposes people around it to radiation even after the fact of shelling or usage. So that it's not unlike Agent Orange, which was used in Vietnam and had horrible health consequences both to the environment and the service members that were exposed to it. I'll come back to you guys in just a second. We had a question here, and then back to the corners. Okay.
I just wanted whether the Fusion Center is a physical location, and if it is, where is it in Dallas?
It is a physical location. I unfortunately don't actually know the physical location off the top of my head, but we can get it to you. It is known. It's publicly accessible. And they tend to be, in some cases, they're housed in law enforcement agencies, but they're usually a separate facility to which different law enforcement agencies deploy liaisons. So the FBI will have someone there, ICE will have someone there, the Dallas Police Department will have someone there, the sheriff will have somebody there, the state police will have somebody there, and they all share information and trade it about.
Occasionally they give tours.
McKinney, is it McKinney?
Not that do they give to, it's more a funnel for money than it is a
In Collin County.
black, we're after the citizens of Dallas.
I would describe it as a racket looking for a problem. And so, the problems have included at different points in different parts of the country, the war on drugs, the war on terror, the war on immigrants. All of these are basically corrupt rackets to throw money at law enforcement agencies to perform functions that don't actually advance constitutional interests or rights.
The head of the DPS for the state of Texas is particularly close to them and fond of them, and it is a racket.
I think you had a question.
The FISA courts and the public advocate, I mean, it sounds like a great, great thing there, but would they be able to, with the secrecy that you've been talking about, is that going to be, will it do any good? It certainly wouldn't do a harm, but is it sufficient?
Right, and I share your concern, I think you nailed it. It certainly can't hurt. Whether it's enough is anyone's guess. I do know that it's a step forward from now, and I did describe the USA Freedom Act as the first step on a longer road. Let's just pause here and note where we're at. It's the first step on a longer road, but even it is getting waylaid by all these red herrings, the Ruppersberger-Rogers proposal, the White House's proposal. They're trying to derail just even the first step to meaningful reform. And the short answer is no, it's not going to be enough. You can't have secret courts and expect them to be legitimate, period. It doesn't matter who's reviewing. It's great that the judges will hear from the other side finally. Does that actually make it a court? If it can't cite its prior jurisprudence, if the decisions in one context don't have precedential value to bind the future court, it's not a judicial function, right? So it's much more of an executive rubber stamp with judges. And will the public advocate be enough to stop it? I don't know. The future hopefully will tell if we're able to get the USA Freedom Act in place.
Let's take a couple more questions, 2 more, and then we'd like to hear some poetry, man.
Okay, that sounds good.
On those fusion centers that you were talking about?
Yeah.
And you say that you stated that the police department might be involved, and you work with city council. Where would you look in an agenda or a budget or whatever to find out if they're financing something?
So we do know that the Dallas Police Department, and I believe the Fort Worth Police Department as well, are both in the North Central Texas Fusion Center. That's a known fact. How much they're each spending on it, I don't know. And I think the particular way to find it would be either through your State Public Records Act or thoughtful public officials like the one in the back of the room who might have access to that kind of information. Does that help answer your question?
Yeah, because I noticed on the city council lately, there, Dallas City Council agenda, that there have been a lot of money going toward weapons that ordinarily the city of Dallas Police Department will not use.
You're onto something here. Yeah, the militarization of police is a very problematic phenomenon. It includes everything from SWAT teams, surveillance drones. Berkeley, California tried to buy an armored personnel carrier, which we were able to stop. And let me rephrase that. People like you, who we supported in Berkeley, were able to stop. We don't do anything, but people like you around the country are winning policies every day. Jackson, Mississippi won a racial profiling policy. So did Hartford, Connecticut. Berkeley increased the standards under which local police have to satisfy constitutional suspicion requirements as a predicate to collect the information that they then give to fusion centers. The city of Chicago passed a resolution saying that torture is a crime and everybody involved in it should be prosecuted. And these are things that cities can do, and they have immense value, especially when you think that the 400 cities, including Dallas, that repudiated the Patriot Act are particularly why the NSA and the FBI face sunsets in the Patriot law, in the Patriot Act reauthorization. It's because you all were raising your voice, and you can have the same influence going forward. I just want to make one plug here connecting this. So the Bill of Rights Defense Committee has a piece of model legislation. We don't actually intend for anybody to use it as model legislation, but we would love for you to use it as an organizing tool to get in the room everybody who's not here. And what is it? It is the bill that would stop all of the bad things that local police do. Right? It would stop racial profiling, intelligence collection without reasonable suspicion of criminal activity. It would stop police from arresting people for videotaping the police. It would stop the procurement of military equipment without public transparency. It is the sort of gold standard of everything you could possibly want from a police department with respect to civil rights. And we developed it so that you could go to all the other people who aren't in the room right now and say, look, We care about the same things you do. You want to come to our next meeting, or maybe come out on the 10th when we challenge the fusion centers. Because after we take down intelligence collection, we're going to go after the police to make sure they're not rounding up immigrants in your community.
We have a local person who is really active in police brutality issues, Colette Flanagan, whose son was shot last March by Dallas police. The 70th unarmed man of color who was shot in Dallas in the last 10 years or so. Anyway, just, so we're gonna get the word to Colette that we've got this model that we can follow.
Yep.
I think Rashid has a question, and Mavis has a question, and maybe you. Okay, so Rashid first.
One observation, for all my lived here 30 plus years, consider myself an American, but back home in Pakistan, had a conversation with a gentleman. He's in the government of Pakistan, considered to be an American specialist, and this strand of conversation that we're having, and the activist that I think I am, and here I was talking and discussing, it reminds me, gives me goosebumps what he said to me. He said, the struggle in 60s was so easy if you guys, referring to me, he said, if you're trying to do what you think you're trying to do, you have no idea what apparatus is already in place in your country. He's referring to me, and this is a senior military guy with however many flowers that he retires with. So knowing what he said 2 months ago, what is the backlash, discreetly or overtly or covertly, is coming towards people like us? I don't know who's recording our conversation in this room. No, take it very seriously, because
Ask your question, Rashid.
where is that? What is the danger? What is the retribution coming from the government or the agencies?
I don't think it will impact grassroots activists yet. I mean, they have riper targets, and I'll put it to you like this: the lone dissenting vote against the Patriot Act found himself out of the Senate the year that the Supreme Court allowed corporate contributions in elections. That's Russ Feingold, who was voted out of the Senate after a plastics magnate bought a seat for $5 million the year that the Supreme Court held in Citizens United that corporations could buy elections. So that there are more opportune targets for the intelligence agencies than us. But to your point, when the hammer falls, when authoritarianism rises fully fanged, it will be too late to stop it, right? And we have seen that lesson demonstrated around the world over history, over and over again. And I'll just leave it at that. Okay. No, that's right. And was Mavis, did you have a question?
Yeah. Dallas is one of those cities that's all hot right now for the 2016 Republican Convention, National Convention. If that should happen, do you think the fusion center surveillance, should we expect that to impact local activists in a different way?
No question. Absolutely. Yeah, so treat it as an existential, self-facing threat, because it is poised against domestic speech as much as it is any other target. We'll throw one other case at you, the Towery case, and I'll go back to Lon. Has anybody heard about the Towery case in Washington State? It goes like this: a civilian Pentagon employee infiltrating peace groups to write threat reports about their activities, then cite it in his official capacity as an intelligence analyst, spread it across the country. It sparked litigation. It's now before the Ninth Circuit Court of Appeals. But this is the Pentagon doing that, not just the fusion centers. And it was particularly facing specifically anti-military dissent. Lon?
I just wanted to go back to Mavis's question to emphasize a very real and present threat to people here in North Texas. The 1984 Republican Convention here in Dallas was a very unpleasant event for all of us who believe in basic civil rights. And we are threatened with another event, and we just should all be on high alert.
Without Judge Sanders.
Pardon?
I know, right?
Oh, yeah, without Judge Sanders here. You know, so it is very real and present. And I consider these little institutions insidious and dangerous. And we all just need to be aware about that human danger here.
I just have something to say that Pax Christi Dallas has joined with Pache Bene in their campaign nonviolence project, and we are going to come up with some kind of a nonviolent action for September 21st, 27th, but we don't know what it is that we want to do yet. And there are so many different things that people who care about ending war and ending poverty and caring for the climate, the planet, that we could do. So I would love to get your ideas, and I would love to have you join us, because we want to have a convergence of all of us in doing something in September. Now, I know that a lot of people are doing a lot of things over the spring and the summer, and I think that's great, but I just wanted to put this in your mind to think about something that's meaningful, something we can do.
Sorry, Heidi, I have one quick question, very quick. So I know there was an email list passed around here. We talked about everybody connecting with each other here. So I don't know everybody here. Is there some way, some forum that we can all connect, everybody that was in this room here tonight? Yeah, I know, I signed that, yeah. But does that mean I'm going to get other, you know what I mean?
You'll get emails, but I think that's, to your point, that's still organization connecting to you. I'm really interested in you guys connecting to each other, and we started that with the introductions. If any of you have time after, I'm going to spit this rhyme and we'll be done. And if you have time to hang out for 5 minutes and meet some of the other people in the room who you haven't before, I think that could be a really productive exercise.
Facebook page?
And if y'all are all interested in carrying on this conversation, and we do this stuff all the time. We had one similar event maybe about a month ago with Dr. Rick Halpern from SMU, who talked about his latest visit to Israel and Palestine, and he looked at that situation through the prism of human rights. So we can keep conversation going on these subjects and come together in an informative evening with a great speaker and good food and fellowship. So if y'all are all interested, we're capturing your email addresses. You will hear about this. And please, to answer Michael's call, come back next time we tell you that we organize or something, and hopefully it's a little temperature-friendly. So
this will be a big event, May 17th. John Deere will be here in Dallas at the Cathedral of Hope, and it'll be a good time to connect. So take a brochure when you
want to talk some more about BORDC, your needs, membership, money. You need money. I'm sure you need money.
So I'll put this out there. We're a grassroots group founded in 2002 specifically to fight the Patriot Act. We exist on a shoestring. There are 5 of us around the country. We've worked on resolutions in hundreds of cities. We shed about 20% of our staff last year due to the funding cuts. I have 2 other organizers on my staff, 1 comms person and an admin person, and we're covering 50 states. And so we're fighting the national security establishment with something like 0.08% of its budget. We run mostly on grassroots contributions ranging from $10,000 to $10,000. Any support you might be in a position to offer, we'd be very excited to leverage. And I would say, pound for pound, there is no organization in the country that is even nearly in our league with how much impact we have on these issues. And you can visit us online at bordc.org. And should I spit a rhyme?
If you rap, man, you'll get your money.
Word. So, outside of work, I ran a Kickstarter campaign this January to fund the creation of a music video, and I just recorded the track last week. It's a dance track, an electro house song about the history of government surveillance, and I'll spit you the lyrics. I can't beatbox the instrumental, it would be a little intense, but the rhyme goes a little something like this. The NSA breaks the law every day. It doesn't matter who you are or what you say, they monitor your phone calls and emails anyway. Corrupt Congress and courts paving the way, there is a lesson you will learn one day. Watch what you say. They spy on your mind, record your calls for posterity, commit daily executive crimes with impunity. They're the authorities here to keep us safe until the boot ends up on your face. It's the NSA against the Constitution. We the people are the ones our government is abusing. We can force any agency to make a new choice when we build a movement, each raising our voice.
That's right.
For 100 years, since World War I, the FBI versus free speech has held the gun. Constitutional rights on the run, the Palmer raid's the first, but not the last one. Fast forward 40 years to the real Red Scare. McCarthy did a number, but the FBI was there, dude. They were everywhere. They knew what you wore to bed. Right. They prosecuted people for the thoughts in our heads. What does it mean to monitor thoughts? Spying is a lot more than watching what you bought. It's the feds always knowing what you've got in your head. Not only whoever with whom you share your bed, but whether you're compliant or a threat. Instead, a head like MLK to be neutralized. That's the word the FBI used. Decades of lies exposed, revealed, as institutionalized. Some people think that Edward Snowden is a traitor. They forget everything that happened later. Congress lied to by executive officials. We're talking about corruption in the Capitol for shizzle. Democracies fizzle when their people are watched. That's why the NSA's got to be stopped, and the FBI too. Don't forget what they do. Entire agencies arrayed against you. Raiding the homes of peaceful activists, setting in motion predictable plot twists, arresting democracy to bind her wrists. The constitutional coup already happened. It's DHS biometric data collection, surveillance drones, automatic license detections, departments of corrections, eclipsing universities. We must all together resist, or we will be history. It is the agencies against we, the people. Don't stoop, don't grovel to no government steeple. We can force anyone to make a new choice when we build a movement, each raising our voice.
That's right.
We're all in this together, you know. Thank you. So, thank you for being here tonight, and please make sure you meet somebody new before you leave.
So, just one quick, is there going to be a collection here tonight for?
Yeah, we can pass that.
We can do it. Let's do it.
And I'm happy to accept checks if you want to write them out.
Credit cards?
I can do that.
Cash only, cash only.
You're very kind. Thank you. I do have forms.
Oh, you're going cash?
We can do cash, or we can do, I've got a.
Tell me when you have
That's just a
You don't mind if it's
organization
printed?
getting started in North
Right.
Texas.
You don't mind if it's printed?
No, not at all, of course not. Thank you, thank you, Susan, you're very kind. You said you had 100, you want these? I'm sorry?
Email, it's not a crisis. It's not touching our everyday life.
Oh, yeah.
When we went to people like us, we were screaming. And everything.